The lecture hall was silent, save for the faint scratching of chalk against the blackboard. Professor Harold Whitaker, a man with a reputation as sharp as the creases in his suit, stood at the front of the room, his back to the students. The air was thick with tension, the kind that comes when someone is about to be made an example of. "Mr. Johnson," Whitaker said, his voice dripping with condescension, "why don't you come up here and solve this equation for us?" At the back of the room, Marcus Johnson, a 19-year-old black student from Chicago's South Side, slowly rose from his seat. He was used to this. The stares, the whispers, the way his presence seemed to make the room uncomfortable. He adjusted his glasses, the ones his grandmother had saved for months to buy, and made his way to the front of the room. The other students watched, some with pity, others with amusement. They all knew what was coming. Whitaker had a habit of humiliating students he deemed unworthy, and Marcus, with his thrift store clothes and quiet demeanor, was an easy target. The equation on the board was complex, a problem designed to stump even the most advanced students. Whitaker smirked as he handed Marcus the chalk. "Take your time," he said, his tone mocking. "We wouldn't want you to feel rushed." Marcus stared at the board, his mind racing. He had seen this type of problem before, not in a textbook, but in the patterns of the city, the way traffic flowed, the way numbers danced in his head when he worked late nights at the grocery store to help his family make ends meet. Math wasn't just a subject for him. It was a language, one he had taught himself to speak fluently. The room grew quieter as Marcus began to write. The chalk moved swiftly, confidently, as if it had a mind of its own. Numbers and symbols filled the board, each one a testament to his brilliance. The smirks on the students' faces faded, replaced by looks of disbelief. Even Whitaker, who had been leaning against his desk with arms crossed, straightened up, his expression shifting from smug to stunned. When Marcus finished, he stepped back, his hands dusted with chalk. The room was silent, the kind of silence that feels like it could shatter at any moment. Whitaker stared at the board, his mouth slightly open. The equation wasn't just solved. It was solved in a way that was elegant, innovative, and utterly beyond what anyone in the room had thought possible. "That's correct," Whitaker said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. He looked at Marcus, really looked at him for the first time. "How did you?" Marcus didn't answer. He simply handed the chalk back to Whitaker and returned to his seat, his head held high. The room erupted in murmurs, but Marcus didn't hear them. He was already thinking about the next problem, the next challenge, the next opportunity to prove that brilliance knows no color. Marcus's journey to this moment hadn't been easy. He grew up in a small, cramped apartment in Chicago's South Side, where the sound of sirens was as common as the hum of the refrigerator. His mother worked double shifts as a nurse, and his grandmother, a retired teacher, was his anchor. She was the one who first noticed his knack for numbers. "Marcus, baby," she would say, "you got a gift. These numbers, they talk to you. Don't let nobody tell you different." But life wasn't easy. Marcus often stayed up late solving math problems by the dim light of a desk lamp, while his younger siblings slept in the next room. He worked part-time at a grocery store to help pay the bills, but his mind was always elsewhere, lost in equations, patterns, and the beauty of numbers. When Marcus walked into Professor Whitaker's advanced calculus class on the first day, he immediately felt out of place. The room was filled with students who wore designer clothes and carried themselves with an air of entitlement. Whitaker, a tall, stern man with a reputation for being a genius, eyed Marcus with barely concealed disdain. "Mr. Johnson?" Whitaker said during roll call, pausing as if the name itself was a puzzle. "I assume you're here by some special arrangement." The class chuckled, but Marcus kept his head down. He was used to this. The assumptions, the microaggressions, the way people looked at him and saw only his skin color, not his potential. The day of the equation incident wasn't the first time Whitaker had tried to humiliate Marcus. A week earlier, during a discussion on theoretical mathematics, Whitaker had called on Marcus to explain a concept he hadn't yet covered in class. "Surely, Mr. Johnson, you've read the assigned material?" Whitaker had said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Marcus had stumbled through an answer, his face burning with embarrassment. The class had laughed, and Whitaker had moved on, satisfied. But Marcus didn't forget. He spent the next week poring over textbooks, determined to prove himself. The equation Whitaker put on the board was no ordinary problem. It was a famous, unsolved puzzle, one that had stumped even seasoned mathematicians. Whitaker had chosen it specifically to embarrass Marcus, confident that the young black student would fail spectacularly. But Marcus didn't fail. As he stood at the board, chalk in hand, something clicked. The numbers flowed through him like a river, and he wrote with a confidence that silenced the room. When he finished, even Whitaker was speechless. After the incident, the dynamic in the classroom changed. Students who had once ignored Marcus now approached him for help with their assignments. Whitaker, though still cold and distant, began to treat Marcus with a grudging respect. But Marcus wasn't interested in their approval. He had always known his worth, even when others didn't. What he wanted was to use his gift to make a difference, to show the world that brilliance could come from anywhere, even the most unlikely places. News of Marcus's triumph spread quickly. Local newspapers picked up the story, and soon Marcus was being hailed as a prodigy. Scholarships poured in, and universities across the country vied for his attention. But Marcus remained humble. He used his newfound platform to advocate for underrepresented students, speaking at schools and community centers about the importance of perseverance and self-belief. "Don't let anyone tell you what you can't do," he would say. "The only limits are the ones you place on yourself." The story ends with Marcus sitting in the same lecture hall, now as a teaching assistant. He watches as a new group of students files in, their faces filled with the same uncertainty he once felt. One student, a young black girl, catches his eye. She sits at the back of the room, just like he used to. Her head bowed, but her eyes sharp with determination. Marcus smiles to himself, knowing that the cycle of doubt and triumph will continue, but also knowing that, thanks to him, the path will be a little easier for those who come after.